Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, December 23rd, 2020, getting closer. It's beginning to look a lot like it's supposed to be looking like Christmas outside, but it's not. Okay, so, and not likely to either. It looks like, in fact, the forecast is warm and rainy, maybe even. Actually, warm and rainy for Christmas Eve, which, of course, would be responsible for producing any of the snow for a Christmas time surprise, but you're not going to get that. And then a cold, cold day for Christmas itself, so all the leftover rain can ice over. But what can I tell you? Worst of both worlds, I suppose, in that sense. But who cares? You can't go anywhere anyway, so you might as well be staying inside and cocooning with the family as it is, and magic sleigh and all that, so don't worry about the weather getting in the way of Santa if that's your concern. But really, honestly, if that's your concern, what are you doing here? Quite honestly, I don't know what to tell you. All right. So good morning. It's a Wednesday. Plenty to cover. Lots of outrage from last night. Trump doing his normal thing. He, too, cocooning in the residence at the White House, watching telly. And I guess sometimes in between tummy num-nums around 6 o'clock p.m. yesterday and telly time, the President of the United States decided to, one, issue a bunch of pardons, and that's always troublesome because this president issues funky pardons, I guess we could say, at the very least. So we can examine some of those. Also, earlier in the day, and not mentioned in the Morning Post for today, but also likely to get some consideration, a number of weird postings for cronies in various government boards and directorates, not all of which are actually paid positions, not all of which are actually, or very frankly, very few of which are important positions, but they're weird and prestigious and to a certain extent, and are just an opportunity for Trump to needle people after he's thrown out of office. To give you an idea of the sorts of things we're talking about here. More of his cronies, I think Pam Bondi among them, and, the one that really caught my eye, Paolo Zampoli, who's a whole different can of worms, essentially, appointed to things like the Kennedy Center Board of Directors, and I think, what else was he appointing people to? Oh, yes, right, to the Holocaust Memorial Board of Directors, or whatever they call the body that's, and I don't know, I'm guessing that's in charge of the Holocaust Museum in Washington. The other day, it passed without mention on the show, I think, that Andrew Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani's son, who works at the White House now in the plum no-show job of being the guy in charge of arranging, I think we did make some mention of being in charge of the guy arranging for championship sports teams to come to the White House to receive their accolades and fast food orders, of which I don't think anybody's done that during the pandemic, have they? I mean, that's a pretty good excuse for staying away. Maybe there's a team somewhere that from some conservative Southern college that showed up or something. Anyway, not much for Andrew Giuliani to do. He was appointed to this Holocaust Memorial Board because something. And I guess now he's got a couple more colleagues on the way, a bunch of weirdos, some of whom are known to us and some of whom are not. Paolo Zampoli, in case you've forgotten about him, one of the two, let's say, teenage, well, he wasn't a teenager, the models were, a teenage modeling impresario, I guess would be the kindest way you could put it. I mean, you could just come right out and say, old man pervert, who along with John Casablancas, the other old man pervert, that one in charge of starting the quite famous Elite Modeling Agency. That was the name of it, Elite Modeling. And they had a lot of very famous models. But the business model of this modeling agency was one that they passed on to Donald Trump, namely, chiefly, an excuse to import attractive young girls, sometimes actually teenage girls, young teenage girls, from also chiefly from Eastern Europe, which was kind of an odd thing all by itself, and pretend that they were a modeling agency, but then, of course, use your leverage as boss of the modeling agency to get, let's say, certain extras and perks out of the models who are brought over, including for John Casablancas and possibly Paolo Zampoli, some dating privileges as well. It was as much a dating service as a modeling agency for John Casablancas, and he ended up essentially fleeing the country as a result, as I understand his history, and has, along the way, married one or two of them, some of them as young as 17 when he was well into his 40s, as I understand it, according to the Wikipedia page. Interesting character, but not Paolo Zampoli. Paolo Zampoli, very similar in his patterns and behavior. Also, the person responsible for introducing Melania to Donald Trump. And there are still a lot of people with a lot of questions about how is it that Melania ended up in the United States anyway, and weird that she didn't really have a modeling career to speak of. Certainly not enough of a modeling career that she should have gotten one of the Einstein visas that apparently allowed her into the United States. Didn't have much of a portfolio, but somehow beguiled Donald Trump very quickly, and whatever. They ended up marrying, and who can account for taste in these things? But there are some weird, stories circulating about that, the origin of that relationship. Donald Trump, of course, then went on to start his own Trump Models modeling agency, because it was a great idea, and he essentially held, half a dozen to a dozen Eastern European teenage girls captive in a Greenwich Village apartment where he charged them exorbitant rent from their modeling appearances to stay there, and then he used them essentially as sales trinkets for his condos. He would have gigantic parties where his rich buddy friends would come and booze it up and allegedly coke it up as well, and he would populate these parties with his teenage models, which is what drew big crowds in the first place, and if they got drunk enough and had a good enough time, they'd buy $1 million apartment in a Trump condo building. So, it's a good pitch. Seemed to work well. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, because Greg Dworkin is here with a raft of serious stories that actually will affect your life, and I thought maybe I could get out of his way and let him talk about those. But, however, he's being called away by the president for a powwow on whether or not
yeah, why are you calling me?
Checks. I don't know. We should answer it on one of these shows. Put it on speaker. Might as well. I'd like to know who's doing this. It's Armando.
Yeah, so would I. People who call it this time of day usually are spam asking for donations for something or other. Sometimes even the Georgia election, which I've already given to.
Are they
but it's always possible. It's something else. You're getting rain. We're getting tons of rain, but we're getting wind. We're going to get 50 to 60 mile an hour gusts on Christmas. Right. And so power outages are expected, but we have the generators, so we're all set.
Okay. Right. If you put up a turbine, it'll be blown over and knock out the wires. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah, maybe. So let's talk about the insanity. Usually what happens on Mondays, we try to summarize a very chaotic weekend. And Wednesdays and Thursdays are a little quieter as things settle down. Not this time.
No, not this time. Okay.
Because, there's a whole lot of stuff going on. First of all, it is Festivus, so I got a bone to pick with Bill in Portland, Maine.
That's right. Okay.
I haven't seen enough albino squirrel pictures lately, and I don't know what's going on with him. He's falling down on the job there. Get into it, Bill.
Hey.
Give us what we need here. All right, now that's done, because that's my only Festivus complaint.
Okay, fair enough.
The guy in the White House is nuts.
Yes.
Crazy.
Right.
And let's talk about that. In fact, our two Tiger Beat on the Potomac sites, Politico and Axios, are both covering it from their own individual angles. Let's do Politico Playbook. Their headline is, "You thought it would be quiet?"
I thought.
It was supposed to be quiet, but we should have known better. In one night, President Donald Trump pardoned 3 crooked former Republican congressmen, including Chris Collins, some private security guards convicted of killing civilians in Iraq, who used to work for Betsy DeVos's brother, endorsed a primary challenge to John Thune, Mitch's boy, he called him, And that's because Thune said that Trump's interference with this omnibus wasn't going anywhere.
Okay.
As we like to say on Twitter, Trump threw the Republicans under the omnibus. And he also is on the brink of blowing up a massive bipartisan spending and COVID relief deal that his administration negotiated with Capitol Hill. Remember, his administration negotiated. He put Mnuchin on the negotiating team and said, this is what we want. And as soon as it was agreed to, he said, no, that's not what we want. So Steve Mnuchin looks like more of a fool than usual. And Jake Sherman, who's writing this, says, we're sorry if you decided to unplug or downshift in these closing days, but if you weren't paying attention, Trump released a quite bizarre video Tuesday night in which he suggested he was unhappy with the COVID relief government funding deal. He spent much of the video decrying the foreign spending in the bill, suggesting it shouldn't be in the package. Of course, the foreign spending wasn't part of the relief package. It was part of the government funding bill that was twinned to ease passage in the Senate. And sources tell us that Trump was angry at the foreign spending, even though he signaled similar spending countless times. He signed similar spending countless times. He's also seemed pumped to one-up Congress on the direct payments part. He said he wanted $2,000 checks, and Congress had only approved $600. Now, the weird thing is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, had already added an amendment for $2,000, so Trump is siding with her.
Yes,
and as soon as Pelosi heard that, like 7 seconds after Trump said that, Pelosi said, we're ready, we're in.
Yeah, well, we'll
put it on the floor immediately. We'll just pass this by unanimous consent. We'll have our $2,000 checks. Of course, that's not going to happen because Republicans in the House will object, and the Senate Republicans, I think Ron Johnson's already blocked it at some point. So the whole idea that that's going to go forward is nuts. And Sherman writes, the thinking in the White House, if there is any at all, he writes, seems to also be that Trump is eager to show he's more generous than Congress, wants to put more money in the pockets of everyday Americans. They think it's never wrong to go against the Hill and act like the outsider he thinks himself to be. Plus, he puts everybody in a jam and redirects the attention back his way. He makes a complete fool of Stephen Mnuchin and the rest of the administration as a result. And, of course, both Loeffler and Perdue have touted this bill and their influence in getting it passed. So he's basically saying, nah, the people from Georgia, they think it was a lousy bill. Don't believe a word they say. So, by the way, they're running for election just in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
And so he's really complicated everything.
Yes, well, he thought he would be simplifying it because it's easy to run government.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, this is, if you're a Republican, this is really bad.
Yeah. Puts him in quite a spot. That's true. And, of course, the unanimous consent request, I assume, would be objected to pretty quickly, and then you can kind of blame that on all Republicans, essentially. And,
right. Madison Cawthorn, at least, will do that.
Yeah.
As John Harwood wrote this morning, no one should ever mistake Trump for an honest person seriously trying to use his power in government to help the American people.
No, he doesn't know how to do that.
Right. So, but it's just, it's usually behind the scenes and you could dress it up and what he really meant and all that sort of stuff. You can't do that here.
Nah, he blurted it out. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So while this is going on, there's a lot of good stuff that wound up in the bill. For example, Sherrod Brown made sure that people could use their earnings from 2019 to determine this year's earned income tax credit. In other words, you're entitled to get more back if you made a little more. Because your income fell off this year because of the pandemic, Brown's amendment allows last year's greater wages to determine how much money you get. And that helps workers whose wages fell in 2020 due to the pandemic. They get a larger refund consistent with earnings from prior years. So that's good. I mean, there's lots of stuff like that that's in the bill that's actually going to help people if and when this gets passed. And it was due to Democrats, and they'll take credit for it. And at the same time, as Jake Sherman also says, and other people note as well, the issue here is that this is going to pass. And the worst that'll happen is that Trump will throw a monkey wrench in the gears, and it won't pass immediately. But then what will happen is that it'll pass under Biden's watch, and Biden will get all the credit for it.
Uh-oh.
So what exactly Trump is doing here in order to try to help Republicans is like a mystery to everybody.
Yes.
All right, here's the way Axios put it, Trump's chaos ploy.
Okay.
Okay, why is he doing all of this? One, because he can. Two, he wants attention. Three, it splits the party. That is his goal. That's why he's going after John Thune, who may be, the best candidate to replace Mitch McConnell eventually.
Oh.
It splits the party. Trump wants the Republican Party to remain beholden to him and is desperate to retain GOP power past January 20th. Top Republicans are increasingly queasy about the two runoffs in Georgia on January 5th that will determine which party controls the Senate, and last night's White House actions undermine the GOP Senate candidates by fomenting turmoil and distraction and robbing the senators of a clear win on the stimulus.
Okay.
And at the same time, many of the pardons appear to have been granted on a whim. They include Duncan Hunter, Chris Collins, and the two voluntary pleaded guilty. Pardon went to George Papadopoulos.
Right.
And so what the problem here is that Trump may be, and there's more to come, of course. Yeah. And what may be happening is that he's going to pardon everybody associated with the Mueller probe, because when Biden gets in, all that stuff's going to come out. Yeah. And at the same time, there's been speculation that, pardon me, but he's doing all of this so that you get pardon fatigue, so that when he pardons Ivanka and everybody else in the family, including himself, you'll say, well, he pardons everybody.
Yeah, sure. He's a generous guy. He just likes
pardon the entire United States.
Sure. I just saw the rude pundit saying, I wouldn't be surprised if he pardons the coronavirus somehow. So, it's on the desk. He might do it. It was a weird batch of pardons, to be sure. Outrageous. He also, I guess, tried to soften the blow by sprinkling in a few normal, regular pardons that might have actually gone through a process. There
were a couple that were there, and then there was the rest. Steve Stockman was a former Texas congressman among the pardoned.
That's not one of the reasonable ones, but yes.
So there's at least three crooked Republican congressmen that were.
Right, including one who hasn't even served a day of his prison term yet, and Duncan Hunter. That one was really just low. Stockman's at least been serving some time on his sentence, 2 out of a 10-year sentence. But, if a former congressman gets sentenced to 10 years, he had his whole career saying that people who are sentenced to 10 years should serve 10 years. Damn it, none of this parole stuff. But what do you know? He's out.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, all of that happened starting at 10 o'clock last night. So I had to scramble a little bit to catch up with it all.
Yeah. Or it seemed like 10 o'clock because it got dark so early.
It was really 10 a.m. But it all looks the same.
Sure. Right. What's the difference? Time is a construct.
So let's see, what else do we have here? We also have the New York Times writing even before this happened.
Oh.
Pandemic aid bolsters Biden and shows potential path for his agenda in Congress. The point is that the centrists and moderates working together kind of forced this on McConnell, who didn't necessarily want this. And, if that's the case, if Biden can work not with leadership on the Republican side, but with some of the Republican moderates like Murkowski, for example, he might actually be able to get stuff done. That's especially true if we win the Georgia elections.
Yep, that's true. That would be nice. Let's do that.
But let's say we do that. Let's say we win those Georgia elections and Biden does this.
We win.
Turns out that, just about everything that Biden ran on as a concept has been validated. Remember back in the primaries, everybody was laughing at him. You know what? He was right.
What? I guess everything, but I can't.
You can work on persuasion. It's not all about just turnout on our side. Okay. We can work with selected situations here, even though Trump is worthless. That was his platform. It wasn't initially attractive until South Carolina, and once he picked up steam and started to win, he was still derided for it. And it turns out politically, pretty smart move.
All right. Well, I hope so. Hope we can all cash those checks.
We all hope so. It all depends on the Georgia election, but his approach to the pandemic and the COVID aid, which he was pushing, and he will get credit for, and Trump will not. A lot of that due to Trump maneuvering himself out of getting credit is going to be a pretty, long-lasting legacy, I think.
Yeah, good. All right. I think there's a lot of this last minute stuff.
No idea Trump was going to do all of this stuff. But then again, they still don't understand he's trying to destroy their party.
I don't even understand that.
Right. Here's another piece from Politico. Trump orchestrates final loyalty test in dying bid to subvert election. So don't forget the other stuff that came out that was crazy is that all the lunatics, like Mike Flynn, we talked about this a little bit on Monday, and his lawyer, Sydney, whatever her crazy name is.
That's not so crazy. She's crazy.
All getting together and deciding that this is the best way to institute Josh Marshall law, and everybody was on record talking about the meeting, saying I was there and I said you can't do that.
Right.
And that's bad. The fact that the meeting happened at all and this was under discussion was part of a bigger picture of Trump being completely isolated from governance and just stewing and having his own month-long Festivus in the White House, and then just popping up to say, no, I want $2,000 and then disappearing again. And just to make sure everybody on all sides of elected officials hate him. Now, he has his loyal base and he thinks that this is going to be something that's going to stick with him forever. That's really not that likely because he's a major screw up. And after he's not in power and isn't useful to those folks anymore, it's really unclear how much of his popularity will remain. But he's banking on it. Then again, he banks on a lot of things that go bankrupt. So speaking of banking, his personal bankers at Deutsche Bank, have resigned.
Yes, I saw something about that.
See, after he's out of power, all this stuff comes out. It's not like you can sit on this forever.
Yeah.
And again, one of the things that makes you crazy, this being Festivus, is the fact that this was all there and people refused to see it, didn't write about it, ignored it. Pretended Trump was normal, pretended he's not a insane, damaged human being whose personality doesn't allow him to be president, and they sort of normalized it and made allowances for it or didn't talk about it or whatever.
That is true.
Both in the all of a sudden the press has discovered that, he's really a damaged personality and a lot of his behavior isn't very good for the country.
Well, I hope they hold that door open.
28, 27 days before he leaves.
Yes, it is late in coming, but I do hope they hold the door open. My pet peeve yesterday was, even if they managed to come to the realization that he's terrible at governance and was highly corrupt and committed all sorts of political and financial crimes, and even if he's held to account on some of those, the appointment of Paolo Zampoli yesterday to some ceremonial board or another reminded me that there's a insanely large and long rap sheet of sex crimes for which he needs to be held accountable and should never have been elected in the first place that are swept under the rug by, it's bad news that he's doing all these things that are unconstitutional, impeachable, illegal, that he's stealing money left and right, and you want to hold him accountable for those, which are big deals. But yeah, you forget that he was a creepy perv who imported 14-year-old girls from Eastern Europe for his own pleasure for decades. Okay,
speaking
so I thought I would remind
you. Pervs, there's that association with Jeffrey Epstein, and I expect more to come out about that. But then there's another creepy perv that we should also mention. Marcy Wheeler reminded us.
She's not the perv.
Dr. Marcy Wheeler. Dr. Empty Wheel.
Sure, why not?
Given the fact that people on the right have been making fun of doctorates that aren't medical doctors. But, she reminded us that there's a fellow named George Nader.
Yes, right.
He's a businessman.
Not
and
Ralph.
A repeat convicted sex offender, also associated with the Trump administration. And the thing
Pedophile,
is, he was one of the ones that helped launch the Mueller probe in the first place.
Yes.
He was being interviewed about other things, presumably these sex crimes.
Yep.
Although we don't know that. A lot of the stuff is redacted from the Mueller report. Mm-hmm. And, watch for a pardon for him, except if you pardon him, you're pardoning a repeat convicted sex offender.
Yes.
So but Trump appoints them to boards. Why shouldn't he pardon them?
And he is one. And QAnon still thinks he's battling a world cabal run by them and is there, in fact, the savior of the world from this wild, crazy pedophile ring, except, like I said, he's, one, pardoning them, as you said, pardoning them, and two, embedding them in government in cushy jobs in whatever, in the arts and in strange ambassadorships, et cetera, et cetera. Paolo Zampoli, quite a figure. I encourage you to look him up.
Yeah. Well, as Molly Jong Fast tried to summarize the week so far, and it's only Wednesday, she said, look, on the one side, you have the president trying to figure out how to do a stupid coup so he can be president for life. And on the other hand, you have Democrats wanting states not to go bankrupt. So, both sides.
Yeah, right. They're all alike. And I can't tell you how much of that I'm seeing from hardcore Twitter leftists, I guess, too, as well, by reminding us that they're all the same and it's all corrupt, and what you should really be doing is putting me, whoever they are, in charge of government that I also hate and hope for better results than when you put Republicans who hate government in charge. Okay?
Right. So one of the guys who's leaving, as of right
works.
now, is Bill Barr. Barr's guiding principle was to protect Trump. With Barr out, New York prosecutors are freer to zero in on the president, says Chris Smith in Vanity Fair. This is from the Pundit Roundup, but I'll give it to you here so you can find it. So it's just a reminder that when Trump's protection disappears and Barr's replacement, it's very unclear, what happens in the Justice Department now. Perhaps the professional folks there, the careerists, will feel a little bit more emboldened to do their job, just like they do at CDC. But without Barr, a whole lot of stuff may come out that wasn't going to come out otherwise.
That would be nice.
And on his way out, Barr says, you know what, you don't need a special counsel for Hunter Biden. That's stupid.
Right. Well,
that means if Trump appoints one, Biden has political cover to immediately fire them.
I guess that's true. Thank you, Bill Barr. I don't know. We'll say that once, and it's on the record. We taped it, and we never have to say it again. All right, cool. We'll be back in 2 minutes, and hopefully not say it then. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with the desperate attempt at rounding up all the crazy stories just from yesterday, although we could throw it back a couple of days, too.
This one from Mateo Gold, this particular tweet. Trump assembles a ragtag crew of conspiracy-minded allies in flailing bid to reverse election loss, which was in the Washington Post. And the Lincoln Project picked up on that and had a quote here. A marathon meeting that lasted more than 4 hours and included discussion of tactics ranging from imposing martial law in swing states to seizing voting machines through executive fiat, or a shorter version, according to the Lincoln Project, the sedition in the Oval Office, or an auto golf, or whatever you want to call it. Here's the thing. Clearly everything that they've tried to do, including using the Supreme Court, has failed. And so their next and last move is on January 6th, and I'm going to ask you as the expert on all matters in Congress matters, to explain what it means when Mo Brooks from Alabama or Madison Cawthorn from North Carolina object to the presenting of the electoral vote to Congress, and Mo Brooks from Alabama talks Tommy Tuberville, the new senator, into also objecting. So now you have an objection in both the Senate and the House side, and what's that mean?
Yeah, well, good question. I don't know. It might mean nothing. In the end, nothing. But,
well, it forces a vote, doesn't it?
It can. Certainly, I guess the way it would work, of course, if depending on who rises to it. I guess either one of them could do it first. That'd be funny if they fought about who was going to make the objection first, either as between Mo Brooks and latecomer to this Madison Cawthorn, who loves stealing the spotlight. It'll be real interesting to see whether he tries to do that. Technically, I guess Tuberville could rise and make the objection. He'll be there in the joint session too. So I think they should have a huge fight over who goes first. But somebody makes an objection in the middle of the counting of the opening of the envelopes and counting of the electoral votes. And if you remember from seeing it done in 2001 following George W. Bush's controversial so-called election, or in 2004, or in 2016.
Does the accounting firm hold the envelopes like in the Oscars?
No, they don't, but I guess it's the Secretary of the Senate, or I don't know who holds them, gives them to the Vice President. They go first to the Vice President, but it doesn't say anywhere who's holding them first. But after they go to the Vice President as President of the Senate, everything is dictated by law about who holds the things. But yeah, you can interrupt the counting and object to one state or another, or all of them if you wish, I suppose. And then they'll ask you whether your objection is in writing, and that could be a problem for the people who plan to object. I don't know if they can write, but presumably they have someone on staff who can do it.
Tuberville, I'm not sure.
Right,
I'm not even sure he has enough staff to do that.
He may not have anybody yet. But yeah, your objection must be stated in writing, and it has to be signed by at least one member of both the House and the Senate. So when we've seen it before, it's been House members objecting, and then the chair, in this case, the presiding officer, the president of the Senate, Mike Pence, will ask whether it's been signed by a member of the other House. Up to now, it's never been signed by a member of both houses, or not never, but in the last 3 rounds of objections, as I mentioned, 2001, and then 2005, early after the 2004 election, and then right after the 2016 election. This time, supposedly, it'll be signed by a member of both houses, which will mean that the joint session will dissolve, and the senators will leave the House chamber and go back to the Senate, and the objections will be considered with a time limit of 2 hours on debate in both houses, and then they'll vote, and the Republican Senate at 52-48 will vote on whether or not to accept this objection, and I guess do whatever the complaint asks. Like, I haven't seen it yet, but I presume it'll be to throw out the electoral votes of the state or states in question. The House will vote separately. They, of course, would have a Democratic majority, likely, I assume, to reject that objection. Ordinarily, you would think, if it was all along party lines, of course, the Republicans in the Senate could, in fact, sustain the objection, but it sounds like everybody wants it over and done with. McConnell's official position, anyway, is that he doesn't want this to happen at all because it'll be an uncomfortable and stupid-looking waste of time. And enough Republican senators have said, no, I don't want any part of it, that it doesn't have much chance at all of passing.
Well, it's not just the question of having a chance of passing.
Okay.
It's one of those situations where you do not want to be in the position of going on record as a Republican, whether you are opposed to or favoring Donald Trump, because now it's there, right there on the record. I voted this way. You don't want that. You want to be able to dance around it and use your political skills to not answer questions.
Yes. I mean, we've already seen, even without the vote, if you answer honestly to someone who can write it down, as John Thune did, that no, this is a stupid idea and I don't want to do it, word gets to Donald Trump, and now Donald Trump is saying he'll arrange for, I don't know if they'll ever have the power to do this, especially out of the presidency, but wants to see Thune primaried in his Senate reelection bid. It's a threat he makes about everybody. Sometimes it's idle, but sometimes it's not. So, yeah, and nobody wants to have that vote, but Tommy Tuberville hasn't been in the Senate at all and doesn't know what it's like to be widely despised by your colleagues for setting them up on a stupid vote. But he could talk to Rand Paul about that, or Ted Cruz about that, or Ron Johnson.
He's in the running now. He's certainly leading, probably right at this moment, for dumbest senator.
Yeah.
But in terms of most disliked senator, he's giving Rand Paul and Ted Cruz a run for their money.
True. Doesn't want to be at the top of this AP poll if you ask people about it. But yeah, they're going to, well, they might force this thing, and then the Senate will try to dispatch it as quickly as possible, and then Trump will rage and scream.
But dispatch it means a vote.
Yeah, yeah, right.
I mean, basically what they're doing is by objecting, they're forcing a vote.
Of some
which
kind.
they'll lose.
Yes. Right. I suppose they could try and, maneuver around it by saying, well, we'll, table this vote or something. And then we technically voted, on a procedural issue and not the issue itself. But yeah, then the House, regardless, will reject the objection. And no matter what happens, they get back together and they don't have agreement between the houses on going forward with the, or recognizing the validity of the objection. And without that agreement, the objection is not agreed to, and they accept the electoral votes from the state and, thumb their noses at the people who make the objections and then continue on. Now, a lot of Republicans in the House are actually hinting that they will be very, as disruptive as possible and object to as many states as possible. And depending on how it's done and what the rulings from the chair are and what Republicans in the Senate and the House, for that matter, really want to do, you could see one consolidated 2-hour debate on all the objections. You could see a series of 2-hour debates called for, a series of votes.
Yeah, Mo Brooks has already said you better strap in because it's going to be a really long January 6th.
Yeah, and it could go on into the 7th and 8th and longer, and there's a lot of theories about what that might mean. I'm not so concerned about it, and it might make an interesting and fun political show. Most people will get bored and tune out. I think that for the length of time, the couple of days that the Senate will have a Republican majority before the results come in from Georgia, and then depending on how that goes, possibly all the way, a Republican majority with a Republican president still in place until January 20th. These Republicans, and this president in particular, are kind of dangerous, and the more of that time that they burn on loser proposals to reject electoral votes, I think I'm kind of actually not unhappy about that.
Right. Now, the Georgia runoff is January 5th, the day before this happens, but still, a big mess for Loeffler and Perdue.
Yeah,
so
but we might not know the
thank you for that
yet.
rundown because, it's going to be a mess, and it's going to be a really messy 2 weeks after that between January 6th and January 20th when finally the grown-ups take over, which we can't wait for. So, that's basically my summary for today, but there is this completely non-related couple of items I want to go over. One
You think
is this 11 Alive, that's the name of the station in Georgia,
yes,
has Democrats holding lead over GOP candidates in Senate runoffs. The new poll. Anybody's race, anybody could still win. We don't know what the turnout's going to be on election day.
Georgia.
But
definite
warning signs for the Republicans here.
Yeah.
Okay, with a little more than 2 weeks away. According to the data, Ossoff has managed to widen his lead over Perdue since their last poll in the Senate runoff 2 weeks ago. Ossoff now leads Perdue 51-46, up from 50-48. And in the other runoff race, Warnock's lead over Loeffler remains unchanged from 2 weeks ago, 52-45.
All right.
52-45 for Warnock and 51-46 for Ossoff. So Warnock doing slightly better because, as we talked about on the show on Monday, Loeffler's a slightly worse candidate.
Yeah.
At this moment, it appears both Democratic candidates may be benefiting from Republican infighting. Imagine that. We just spent an hour going over that.
Yeah.
Over who and what's to blame for President Trump's defeat in the November 3rd general election. And some of the GOP have laid blame at Republican leaders in Georgia, and some extremist supporters have suggested Republicans sit out the election. And some Republican voters may be listening, according to this poll. According to the survey results, roughly 5% of the 690 registered voters are sitting out the election. More of these voters are Republican, with some believing either the voting process was rigged or that their vote doesn't matter. Overall, 70% of voters say they have full or some confidence, and a full breakdown of the results is available. And this is a Survey USA poll, and they did pretty well with Georgia in November 2020, so, something to keep in mind. Now, here's something that's completely unrelated to all of that, and I think, a really interesting story in and of itself. John Alsop, writing for Columbia Journalism Review, has a media scooplet. Representative Ted Lieu from California is working on legislation aimed at reviving the FWP, the Federal Writers Project, a 1930s New Deal program that put unemployed journalists and authors to work documenting America on the public dime. Timing and details of the bill are to be determined, but Lieu's office told me a new FWP could be anchored within the Labor Department or a cultural agency, and we'll get to that in a minute, and could run a grant program administered through existing community institutions, including newsrooms.
Interesting.
Yeah,
if you pass
and
it
it
quickly.
follows a recent push from fans of the FWP who think reviving it could serve a double benefit, putting unemployed writers to work while helping America understand itself, which is a key goal of the original project.
Yeah.
Right? So it all
gonna need a
sounds
sales
good,
job.
and there's CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, who built all those beautiful bridges and the parks
That
on the
I've
east.
heard of reviving.
There's a lot of
This
stuff
is a new one.
that indoors that came out of there that's really good.
All right. If you could tell Donald Trump that it stands for F the Washington Post, and then sign it.
But here's the downside.
Oh.
Okay, and I actually tweeted this to Ted Lieu just so he's aware. Of course he's aware. He's an expert on this. I mean, so his constituents are aware and his readers are aware. But does the name Dorothea Lange ring a bell?
Yes, but just a little ding like we have at the start of the show.
Right. She's a photographer, and during the Depression, and especially famous during the Dust Bowl era, she took photographs, and the photographs that she took were when she was working for a New Deal agency in 1937 creation called the Farm Security Administration, or FSA. So this was not the FWP. This was the FSA. And as part of the combating of rural poverty, which is what this was about, she worked for them, and she helped chronicle the Dust Bowl. So she's got some really super famous pictures and photographs.
I think I know the one you're talking about.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? So fairly well known. But here's the thing.
Okay.
Unknown, or less well known, is that she continued working for the FSA right up until World War II. Okay? And one of the things that she continued to take pictures of was the relocation of Japanese Americans in 1942 at Manzanar and other places. And they were censored and weren't really available until like 2006.
Oh, really that long?
So the military impounded them. And the point is, because she worked for the feds, they owned the product.
Yes.
And they could decide whether or not to publish it. And they could decide whether or not to suppress it. Okay. So if you're going to hire writers now in 2020 to write about America, keep in mind there needs to be some transparency about what happens if they write something that they don't like and it doesn't get published.
Yeah, right. And that would be, you would think, an extraordinary problem under someone like Trump. But
it's happened.
You might think,
right.
You might think
these
it won't
examples,
happen under Biden,
it's not just making
it up. Like this. Yeah. That's interesting. So let's see, when were those pictures? Well, yeah, I mean, it would have been a Democratic administration, I suppose. Although
1942, she took the photographs, and they were unpublished until 2006.
Yeah, I guess anybody could have fixed that in between then and 2006. Why well, I don't know. I guess it was mostly forgotten about until then for some reason, but. Because, we were pretty convinced about the wrongness of the internment earlier than 2006.
Right. But until George Takei and other people really, brought it to our attention, it was sort of in the back burner. I forgot about it.
Yeah. That happens.
Anyway, so there's a story in something called Anchor Editions. Dorothea Lange censored photographs of FDR's Japanese concentration camps. A photographic record could protect against false allegations of mistreatment and violations of international law, but it carried the risk, of course, of documenting actual mistreatment.
Yep.
So they were impounded.
That is pretty... Life, it's so complicated.
It is. So I just thought that was an interesting story that people should keep in mind. And again, this is
I can't believe
getting back
socialism didn't
to
save everything.
nonpartisan. Let's just keep in mind, basic human principles, and it doesn't matter whether it's Democratic or Republican governor or president or administration or agency. Things happen, and everybody needs to look over their shoulder and make sure that they know what's going on. And so, yeah, should this writing thing happen, it sounds like a great thing, a good idea. I hope it occurs. But also, keep in mind the government isn't 100% always good.
Yeah, that's true. Wow. Well, that's quite a complicated story and gives us something to read for maybe for the holiday break if you're sitting by the fire. Interesting.
Anyway, that's my story. That's my show for today.
I'll take it.
We got one tomorrow?
Yeah, we'll do one tomorrow.
All right,
we don't
I'll
have
see
to
you
load
tomorrow.
the sleigh until after the show.
Yeah, good.
So I think it'll be fine. Yeah, Friday, I'm thinking maybe everybody kind of would like a day off. That would be nice.
Yeah.
You'll have it off anyway. And
Yeah,
I'm
I have
sure
it off anyway, but maybe you could take it off too.
Scott would like the day. I might like the day. I certainly don't want to wake up early for the show on that Friday. I don't know. Maybe we'll take some
I don't know
breaks.
what time the winds are going to happen, because we're getting 50, 60 mile an hour winds in Connecticut tomorrow.
Okay. I
So
think
if
11,
we have power,
10.
I'm on, and if
Okay.
not, I'll let you know.
Yeah, and if not, and certainly if you feel like sending any stories along, always helps fill the time when we have your ideas as well. So good luck with the
I mean,
winds.
I have a
hope they wait
generator,
until
but
10
that
o'clock.
doesn't help keep the internet up. So
Right.
we'll see.
Well, charge your phone.
Yeah, exactly right.
That's the best you can do. All right. Very good. Thanks, Greg. Good luck with everything. I hope everything stays quiet until at least 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Right, and thank you very much for explaining the
screw you.
process on January 6th. I just think it's one of those, Schoolhouse Rock every day on Kagro in the morning. That's what's just so much fun about the show, and that's why I like being here. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. We will catch up tomorrow. Well, one way or another. I'll have your input for the show. Hopefully everything stays calm weather-wise. Interesting story, Dorothea Lange. And yeah, she's responsible for what I called the Dust Bowl photo. And you know the one too. And I don't know what, did she have a title for it? It's, it's the Worried Mom. You know the one we're talking about. I wonder if there's probably a commonly used term, or title for it. And it's in Dorothea Lange's Wikipedia page. So let's see there, and there it is. Lange's iconic 1936 photograph of Florence Owens Thompson. That's the Worried Mom, if you will. Migrant Mother. Is that the name of the photo? Okay. So that solves the mystery, and I'm glad that Wikipedia exists. And one of these days I really ought to be responding positively to their once or twice yearly entreaties for donations. But it's such a strange organization and so disparate. It's hard to know what you're giving money to. But underappreciated, and I hope they raise enough money to continue on. I don't know what I'd do without Wikipedia, quite honestly, even though they make a lot of mistakes and they're subject to a lot of influence of dark forces around the world. Well, I don't know. One day I guess I will know what I can do without Wikipedia, because someday the Russians will hack it and it'll all go to hell. All right, let's see. Other things to share with you. There are an awful lot. And let's see if I can't round them up. Oh, you know what? This just occurred to me sort of out of the blue to share with you. But I did get some input from folks. Remember when Greg shared, was it on Monday? Shared the photo of the German version of Bob Woodward's latest book, Rage. And it had been titled, of course, in German, because the whole book was in German, and it makes sense, right, to use German for the title too. And it was W-U-T was the spelling of the word. And I was, the big joke was that it looks like internet parlance, kids text speak for what, what are you even talking about? What's going on here? But pronunciation guides offered up to me by several people. Let's see. I've got one in direct messages from Judy Vincent, who corrected me on pronunciation, and one in email. Gosh, did I mark that one so that I could tell you exactly who sent it? I think I actually might have parked it and pocket if I can find it. But anyway, let me open it up. I think this might be it here, just as long as we're doing credit. Yeah, John Ronald, also longtime friend of the show, saying that the German pronunciation of W-U-T would be Wut, or something like it. Wut, W's being V's, and vowels being pronounced as they are in European language. So Wut, which is more or less, he says, a direct translation of rage. And that they also could have gone with other words, but they have slightly different connotations. But I guess his suggestion being Zorn, Z-O-R-N, which would be more like wrath than rage, just to give you a little extra German lesson there. And like I said, Judy Vincent also chiming in about that. In case you were wondering about her or worried about her and the volcano and the volcanic activity out there in Hawaii, she reminds us that is, of course, taking place on the main island, what they call the Big Island there in Hawaii. Of course, they're all Hawaiian islands, but she's on Oahu, not Hawaii, and enjoying things, watching the Grand Conjunction, as many of us were, from Waikiki Beach. Lucky kid she is, being able to do that. But they were a little bit worried about the possibility of the volcanic cloud that was causing what I guess they call VOG there, like volcanic fog, blocking their view of the conjunction. But it got through, so that's good news from there. But she also had some German lessons for us and pronunciation guides. But then we got into talking about all sorts of things, and well, gee whiz, it got away from us, and I forgot to tell you that it was pronounced as Voot. Let's see, what's this here? Oh, Brian Monroe chiming in here on New Year's Eve. An old Irish tradition, he says, is to open your door at midnight and let the old year out and the new year in. They're cats, apparently, these New Year's. I think this year deserves the doors, windows, and garage doors be open. Get rid of that year. And, of course, it's always a good idea to exchange your indoor air with fresh outdoor air, particularly in the days of these pandemics. So give it a shot. The cat will stay out for the night. Bring Dino in, and that's what you can do at midnight. Old Irish tradition. Okay. Right, and Greg adds to that, have a big fan to air the place out. It's good for you to do. All right, let's see. Moving on to other news. Let's flip back over to what I have stored in Pocket, because that's where I sort of park these things to try to have an organized sense of what's happening here. In addition to the weird issuance of the new appointments to the various agencies, and the outrageous list of pardons, Daniel Dale says that Trump last night released another rambling Facebook video. I saw a video of his that he, the video in which he called for the amending of this omnibus spending bill that included COVID relief in it. The part that everybody's focusing on, and I'm glad they're focusing on this, is his call for raising the amount of the direct assistance from $600 to $2,000. No word on whether or not they're raising the threshold of phasing that out. We haven't really discussed that the $600 is phased out really quickly and in a very narrow band, which you could say has the tendency to focus the assistance, such as $600 worth of assistance may be considered, to those in the lower to lower mid income brackets. I think starting at $75,000, this based, of course, on your 2019 income, which doesn't make a great deal of sense, but I guess it's the last year for which they have provable data so that you can, actually verify for the government, because they're going to verify everything, that you are, in fact, in the right income bracket to get this assistance. But starting at $75,000, anybody who earned less than $75,000 in 2019 is eligible for this $600 assistance. Well, I say that, except I guess I should say everybody who was a taxpayer. I don't know whether you get it regardless of whether if your income was too low to have to pay taxes on it, are you included in this or not? This is an actual question when you are working with government rebates like this. But anyway, we'll just focus on the phase out. At $75,000, they begin phasing this thing out, and I think I understand that they did it with a simple and easy to understand ratio. For every additional $100 of income you claimed in 2019 above $75,000, if you made $75,100, your $600 benefit would be reduced by $5. You'd get $595, and it goes up and so on steadily, such that by the time you reach, I think, $99,000 in income in 2019, your $600 is entirely phased out. So if you made $99,001, there is no check for you. I don't know whether that's changing or whether Trump, he didn't say anything about changing that. He just was talking about raising it from $600 to $2,000 per person, or $4,000 for a couple, which is, he didn't even really need to say that because that's the way things work with math. But okay, you never know with married couples how they're going to treat things tax-wise. But the whole rest of that video was complete nonsense. It was actually interesting watching him bash the bill without, of course, clarifying for people that, as we discussed with Joan yesterday, this bill is chiefly a gigantic omnibus appropriations bill for all the missing appropriations bills for next year, and was chiefly about government spending on any number of things not at all related to COVID. And then, of course, they wanted to do this COVID relief, so they tacked it on to the otherwise must-pass omnibus appropriations bill. But then Trump spends the rest of his speech saying this is supposed to be a COVID relief bill, but it's got $1 billion for studying this kind of fish and that kind of bird, and millions and billions of dollars in foreign aid for this country and that country, which are asshole countries, as you know. And completely disingenuous, of course, because he was reading from the section about general appropriations. COVID was just an add-on to that. But what do you know, right? You never heard of such a thing. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let me just continue that thought for you, just to make it entirely, if I didn't make myself entirely clear. So this was, as we mentioned, first and foremost, a bill about covering appropriations for the next year in several government departments. I don't know how many of them it actually covers. I don't remember how many appropriations bills were passed on their own before, but yeah, whenever they get to the end of the year or the end of the fiscal year, usually they do these things at the end of the year if necessary, and they haven't passed full year funding bills for all the other departments, they'll throw them all together in one bill so that they can get the thing done before they either take off on a break, or the fiscal year runs out if they're doing things right, or before they dissolve the Congress if you're in the end of December like we are now. So not infrequently done these days. But yeah, it was mostly a bill about funding all the things like the departments that would, in the ordinary course of business, fund studies of various wildlife, or make appropriations for foreign aid, or various other funny-sounding studies that are a subsection of how we might spend money over at the National Science Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. He even threw in, this bill, it's supposed to be about COVID relief, and there's $1 million for the Kennedy Center, which is closed. It's closed, and they're spending millions of dollars on the Kennedy Center, except it's for regular governmental continuity. The fact that the Kennedy Center isn't holding performances right now because of the outrageous neglect of the pandemic that Trump himself has exhibited is not part of the discussion. But if we want to have a Kennedy Center, still around going forward after the pandemic is dealt with at some point in the future, and all of the friends who he appointed to the board of directors for the Kennedy Center want something to be involved in, later on, then you're going to have to spend some money to maintain it so that it's there after the pandemic. It's not nearly, in other words, the nonsensical, pork-ridden bill that Trump makes it out to be. And I guess I'm a little bit bothered. Oh, certainly I'm bothered by his portrayal of the bill, but I'm bothered by the fact that we really didn't see this coming somehow. That it bugs me that we kind of set ourselves up for this sort of attack by attaching COVID relief to something like an omnibus bill. On the one hand, you say, well, it's a must pass, and if we want to get this thing done, there are very few trains leaving the station at this point in December that are going to get passed by both houses and signed into law. And given that the Republicans seemed, at any rate, to be perfectly willing to kill COVID relief if it was freestanding, it might have made strategic sense to attach it to an omnibus spending bill that they, appeared to want to pass into law as well. So that's from that perspective, it's a good idea. But it did set up this ability to attack this thing disingenuously, of course, as a COVID relief bill chiefly that happened because of corruption in Congress to be larded up with all these other extraneous spending measures, and it's really the exact opposite. And that's kind of annoying. But in addition to that stupid video, I mentioned to you that Daniel Dale said, and I believe him, that Trump had issued this other Facebook video. What did he say? Last night released a 14-minute Facebook video full of lies about the election, as you might have expected. And, like his tweets on the subject, it's too bonkers, repetitive, and irrelevant to bother fact-checking at this point, which is kind of a disturbing message at any point to hear from Daniel Dale, because, of course, he's made a career, and a great one at that, out of doing exactly that. Debunking and fact-checking rambling statements or any statement from Donald Trump. Then he adds, though, this is not some, hey, the fact-checker is exhausted and broken thing. I'm the same as always. It just doesn't make sense at this point to spend time re-debunking the outgoing president's repeated nonsense. And that'll be especially true when he's the former president. And it's a good approach to take on these things, and I'm hopeful, of course, that it's indicative of the wider press's view of how they'll treat him as former president. I wish they would have treated him that way now, but they didn't. Daniel Dale just sort of making an early exit from the fact-checking Donald Trump business. I don't know whether, we'll see whether if Trump makes himself prominent enough a figure while out of office that the bosses at CNN assign him the job of continuing to debunk Trump anyway. But we'll see. I don't know. At any rate, I thought it was kind of interesting. Then he of course gets flack for it from somebody, random person like me on Twitter says, well, that's the danger, Daniel, when truth-muddling lies and deceptions have so blurred the lines between reality and a state of dissonance that the truth is indistinguishable from the BS, although he uses the whole word because he's a potty mouth, giving the illusion of freedom of thought. Truth matters with a hashtag and an attached, story from Psychology Today, and, all good points except where you been? Mark Fallon, who tweets this challenge to Daniel Dale. Daniel Dale has done yeoman's work in debunking this stuff, and he's debunked every lie. I guarantee that it would have been a repeat at this point for him to actually debunk every lie in the 14-minute video. All been done before, whereas I don't think Mark Fallon done any of this stuff. But, he's just making an offhand comment. It's true, too, and so it doesn't deserve, full excoriation here. But it is kind of interesting to watch people come into this at this late hour and say, oh, Daniel Dale, how dare you not take on the challenge of debunking all these lies when, after all, if they go unchallenged, they can... Yeah, I know, but that's the whole point of his entire career to this point, and he's won essentially the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor in debunking Donald Trump BS. And you're like, how can you give up now? Or have you even done any work at this point? I don't know whether he's available or whether he's noticed that Daniel Dale has done this for years on end. And whatever. I think that was sort of, what an ingrate, I guess I would say to that. Okay. I'll mark that one for sharing with all of you. Let's jump back into Pocket and get to these other things. Here's one. This is a headline that I think I need to share with you. I wasn't expecting this one. This was sort of a, whoa, kind of a headline. In the Hill, Harper Neidig, I'm guessing at the pronunciation of the last name, Neidig, NAACP suit, files suit accusing Trump and GOP of violating the KKK Act. Like, whoa, that's a hell of a headline. And also, I know nothing about the KKK Act, so let's check this out. The NAACP is accusing President Trump and the Republican Party of violating the Ku Klux Klan Act. That's something you don't want to be accused of violating, quite honestly, with their efforts to overturn election results in key battleground states. Follow along here. In an amended lawsuit filed Monday night, the civil rights organization added the Reconstruction-era law to their case against the president's campaign that was filed last month. Defendants' efforts to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of voters, targeting cities with large black populations, right, including Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Atlanta, repeat the worst abuses in our nation's history, where black Americans were denied a voice in American democracy for most of the first 2 centuries of the Republic, the new lawsuit reads. The NAACP filed the lawsuit last month on behalf of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization and a group of black Michigan voters, accusing the Trump campaign of violating the Voting Rights Act in seeking to overturn President-elect Joe Biden's victory. The amended lawsuit added the Republican National Committee as a defendant in the case and the allegations about the Ku Klux Klan Act. The complaint accuses the campaign and the RNC of violating the 1871 law's prohibition against, quote, preventing by force, intimidation, or threat any citizen who is lawfully entitled to vote from giving his support or advocacy in a legal manner toward or in favor of the election of any lawfully qualified person as an elector for president or vice president. It's pretty specific. I mean, pretty broad, I guess I should say. But I mean, it's specifically, might actually be pretty well targeted here. They may have landed a punch. The RNC didn't immediately respond when asked for comment, but Trump campaign lawyer, quote-unquote lawyer, Jenna Ellis said the case was without merit. And she knows cases without merit, people. Her quote is, election integrity is about ensuring that every legal vote is counted and all illegal votes are not counted. This suit is baselessly attacking the Trump campaign's efforts to protect the integrity of the ballot for every American, unquote. She said in a statement. She's got it backwards, of course, you know, based on what they're actually doing over there. But, okay, the Trump campaign and its allies have filed a flurry of lawsuits seeking to decertify the election results in key battleground states in a long-shot effort to change the outcome of the election. One might even say a baseless effort to change the outcome of the election. The legal effort has so far failed to take any electoral votes away from Biden's total. That's how baseless they are. The NAACP, in its new lawsuit, alleges that the effort illegally targeted areas with predominantly black cities. These systematic efforts, violations of the Voting Rights Act, VRA, and the Ku Klux Klan Act, have largely been directed at major metropolitan areas with large black voter populations, the lawsuit reads. Defendants have not directed these efforts at predominantly white areas. And that's true. And on the record, and it's been developed on the record for since the beginning, when the county boards of election, for instance, what was it? Which county was it? I can't remember. It was one of the W counties, not the Wisconsin W counties, but the county in Michigan that includes Detroit, where the board was originally refusing to certify the vote, and then did certify the vote, and then tried to rescind their votes to certify the vote. You remember what I'm talking about, except I can't remember the name of the county. Easily Googleable, but I'm doing a radio show here. But you recall that they were going to do so based on their allegations about what was going on with, I don't know what it was, mismatches in the numbers of voters who checked in versus the number of voters who had cast ballots. And though there were lots of reasons for it, they didn't want to hear any of them. And although there were white municipalities and white precincts where the same thing had happened, they weren't being singled out and targeted the way the Detroit precincts were being singled out and targeted. And then even at some point they said, right, one of the commissioners or board members said, I'd be willing to certify everything but Detroit and go ahead with that, even though that there was a higher percentage of mismatch in some of these white precincts outside of Detroit than there were in the ones with the greatest alleged problems inside Detroit. So they really, stepped in it in terms of drawing the lines on, pretty obviously, but without admitting as much, on issues of race. It's going to be a real problem for them. And I guess, it might not come into the case directly, but by reference, they might very well, since the Republican National Committee is one of the defendants here, they might very well make some mention of the North Carolina cases in which the data analyst behind the various redistricting schemes in North Carolina was quite open and honest about the fact that he was drawing the lines based on racial demographics in the hopes of diluting minority votes. And with that on the record and recognized by the North Carolina courts, you'd make a compelling case here. And how would that look? What a great headline it is to have the Trump campaign charged with the violation of the federal Ku Klux Klan Act. Of course, he can pardon himself from that, but we discussed that yesterday about how valid such self-pardons might be. We'll see whether the rest of the country comes along and agrees with that. All right, let's see. Nancy Pelosi, like Greg mentioned, jumping very quickly via Twitter onto the invitation of sorts from Donald Trump to raise the direct aid level to $2,000 and said that Democrats stand ready to bring this to the floor this week by unanimous consent, which I think we all probably have a pretty good understanding of, but just in case we can explain it. I saw also this was being discussed online. David Dayen chiming on these things with some ideas about how to strategize. And in fact, even before Nancy Pelosi made her statement, and she did respond very quickly to the president's, gaffe or challenge, depending on how you look at it. I think at least I saw David Dayen's comments about it before I saw Pelosi's. I guess we could look at the timestamp. But he recognized right away, well, Pelosi ought to just bring this to the floor right away by unanimous consent and say, all right, fine. A one-page bill that raises the level from $600 to $2,000 could be written up in 10 seconds, bring it to the floor, boom, hand it over to the Senate and see what the Senate does with it. It's a great strategy, and it's no accident that it occurred both to Nancy Pelosi, who knows what she's doing, and David Dayen, who also knows what he's doing. He knows the rules pretty well, and it was a good idea, and no surprise then you would see Pelosi capitalize on it. And in fact, we also found out that AOC and Rashida Tlaib, I think, was her partner in this one, had the bill language all ready to go. They had proposed that as an amendment early on, but I guess probably under the rules in which they considered the bill, either weren't allowed to offer that amendment, or perhaps they were, but it was a rejected amendment. But at any rate, the point is that they have the language ready to go, so simple and easy. Though David had an interesting idea about, again, just electoral strategy-wise with the Georgia runoffs coming up, and of course, looking ahead already to midterm elections in 2022, etc. He, and maybe you saw it, he theorized about, well, what if instead of moving the bill by unanimous consent, they brought it to the floor under suspension of the rules, which is also an expedited consideration scheme that could move the bill quickly, but it has some additional caveats, I guess. So just so that you're able to keep up with the debate about things, when they are referring to unanimous consent, they very frequently will abbreviate it as UC. Those in the know will call it UC. So if you see UC there in that context and you're not sure what it means, it's unanimous consent. And for those of you unfamiliar with the concept, basically, even in a voting body like the House of Representatives or the Senate, you can move things very quickly and without a vote by moving, essentially, that the bill or whatever it is you want to do. But in this case, it'll be a bill, right? That you come up and you say, I've got a bill that amends the whatever the hell they call this thing that we passed the other day that Trump is ranting about. It amends that text to read, strike $600 on whatever page it is. And AOC and Tlaib have already identified the page. This really is ready-to-go language. Strike whatever, $600 on whatever page that is, and substitute 2,000 instead. Easy enough to do, but you could, under regular order, you'd write up the bill, you'd bring it to the floor, you'd introduce it, it would be referred to committee, the committee would have a hearing on it, and then a markup, and it'd report it out, and then you'd put it on the calendar, and then you'd bring it up, and then you'd have a rule for consideration of the bill in the House, and debate that for an hour, and then pass the rule for the bill, and then have X number of minutes or hours or what have you to debate the pros and cons of this one-page thing that deletes one number and puts in another, and then you'd vote, and then it would go to the Senate, and they'd do the same thing. So, you want some sort of expedited system, given that this Congress is going to dissolve in a couple of days on January 3rd. Right? So one way to do it is unanimous consent. You simply go to the floor and you say, once you're recognized, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, whoever's in the chair, or chairman, if you're in the House, the committee of the whole House on the State of the Union for these sorts of things. But anyway, you say, I move that, or I ask unanimous consent. You can put it either way. I ask unanimous consent that the bill, whatever number that they put it on, or you can even just do it without a prepared bill. I ask unanimous consent that the recently passed HR, 123, whatever the number is with the omnibus bill in it, be amended as follows on page XYZ, strike $600 and insert 2,000. There's legislative language for all that. And just say it and say, I ask unanimous consent that be done. At which point, if no one objects and is recognized as objecting from the chair, then it's done. You can do anything by unanimous consent, and you don't have to go through the formality of a vote, and they don't actually even take down the names and everybody's position on things. But if you ask for unanimous consent, the body that works by majority rule ordinarily can, if they do it unanimously, agree to anything. I ask unanimous consent that we all be turned into flying monkeys. If no one objects, then, you've done that. Whether or not it works and you are turned into flying monkeys remains to be seen. But the point is that you're on record as endorsing being turned into flying monkeys. And if you don't like the idea, object. So anyway, that's the concept of unanimous consent. And you can do that stuff very quickly. And then it would move over in the Senate, and the Senate could do the same thing, ask unanimous consent. People do it all the time. But the problem is, of course, it only takes one person saying, I object. For good reasons, bad reasons, no reasons. If they're being controlled by a ventriloquist, if they are, in fact, a flying monkey, it doesn't make any difference. If they object, the whole thing's destroyed. But, that's why. It's got the tremendous power to do almost anything you want instantly. But by the same token, that great power is checked by the great power of any one of 435 members in the House or 100 members in the Senate. Just say object and the whole thing goes poof. So, anyway, David Dayen had suggested this possibility. Rather than put that out there And, you would be, of course, daring Republicans to object. And the supposition is either that they wouldn't dare, especially now, as the president has called for exactly this, and you would be bucking Trump, that very dangerous thing to do, to say no, to object at this point, unless, of course, you know secretly in your heart, as you may in fact know, that Donald Trump was bluffing and was hoping that you would call that bluff for whatever reason, or you convince yourself as much. Anyway, so you either buck Donald Trump and object, and everybody yells at you because you're the mean guy that denied them their checks. They would feel that way, and they'd be right. Or you let it go, and it can move, and then move on to the Senate. But you're daring one, and all it would take is one. Now, let's see. One of the other things, of course, would be David was concerned that if you do it that way and one Republican objects, then you can run ads against that one Republican later on in 2022, or if it was, if Perdue or Loeffler for some reason was dumb enough to show up and do the objection. I don't know why they would. Then you could run it against them right now in their runoff election. But he was sort of thinking, well, why do it this way where you can run ads against one person when you could instead either hold a floor vote and hold it against everybody who goes on the record as voting no, or, he said, if you want to do it faster than regular order, but not quite as fast necessarily as unanimous consent, you could bring it to the floor under suspension of the rules, wherein you have expedited debate. By the way, that rule is you get 40 minutes of debate. That's not a lot, so the thing moves pretty quickly. And no amendments are allowed, and you don't need to go to the Rules Committee and write a rule for how you're going to consider the bill. It just comes under its own 40-minute time limitation, no amendments allowed, and in exchange for the luxury of being able to pass it so quickly and without any extended debate and without any complicating amendments. In order to pass it that way, though, you'd have to pass it by 2/3 vote of either house that brings it under suspension of the rules. Anyway, the House uses that much more frequently than the Senate does. So it sets up a higher barrier to actually passing the thing, but by David's reckoning, well, then you would force a vote that's on the record, and you would net many more Republicans because several of them would go on the record to object. Rather than the one that it would take to destroy unanimous consent, you'd be able to run ads. You'd probably still be able to pass the thing, but if you didn't, even if you did, it doesn't matter. As long as you have no votes, you would be able to run attack ads on this subject against many, many more Republicans. That was the theory. But, one or two problems with it. One, by the way, is that when it's a unanimous consent and somebody objects, they don't note in the record who actually objected. And sometimes it's difficult to tell. And sometimes several people. And sometimes the person who objects, you actually, like if you were watching on C-SPAN, you don't actually necessarily hear that person's objection. But as long as the person in the chair running the House hears it, it counts and it's noted for the record. But you never find out necessarily who it is unless somebody who was a witness to it was available to the press and told everybody. But one of the things that affords you is the ability to say, just pin it on Republicans generally and say, when push came to shove and we asked unanimous consent, Republicans objected, and this guy's a Republican and we hate him and we're running an ad against him. He says he wasn't there, but he was, or whatever, and you can fudge it a little bit. But if you don't like that solution, or at least if you don't buy that objection to the idea of doing it by suspension of the rules, you're going to love this one. This is one of the true wonders of parliamentary procedure. So I broke it to David earlier this morning. It's not like a world-destroying objection or anything. And it sounds stupid, but as it turns out, the rules in the House of Representatives are such that suspensions of the rules, suspensions bills, as they call them in shorthand, are only, by rule, considerable on the floor, eligible for consideration on the floor on Mondays and Tuesdays. Today, of course, is Wednesday. So, if you're going to go by the rules and you want to use suspension of the rules to move this thing quickly, you actually have to wait a week in order to do it. And at this point in time, with the end of the session coming up, the Christmas holiday intervening, we'll be right up against New Year's and the dissolution of the Congress, and people need that relief now. If you want to do it by suspension of the rules, you've got to wait a week and then find a way to justify waiting a week in the court of public opinion. Not only waiting a week, but wait till they find out that your plan is not only are we going to wait a week, but we're going to actually make it harder to pass the thing by requiring a 2/3 vote. Considering what we just saw Donald Trump do in attacking the relief bill by pretending that it was a relief bill larded up with appropriations rather than an appropriations bill that was carrying COVID relief on top, I think you'll be pretty easily slaughtered on that one. So he gives in on that. It's true, we should probably move by unanimous consent. It's certainly a lot faster, but he was outraged by the reality that suspending the rules had rules attached to it. What's the point of suspending them then? Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I hope I didn't get cut off at the end of that. Yes, the objection that everybody was making, and David chief among them, and probably a lot of you along with him. What's the point of there being, if there's rules about suspension of the rules, then what's the point of suspending the rules? But if you sit down and think about it, it's really not that nonsensical, right? You want to impose some sort of order and predictability to floor scheduling. I know that's crazy and all that, but if you say, all right, well, if we're going to be suspending the rules left and right, let's at least have some idea for ourselves, for scheduling purposes. How often will that be happening, and when can it happen, and when should you expect it to happen? And the answer is Mondays and Tuesdays. Monday and Tuesday being, of course, chiefly, these days, used by members of Congress to travel back and forth between their district and Washington, D.C., and the way they typically handle suspensions bills is on Monday. They will bring them up one at a time, have the debate on them, and when a vote is called for, they then ask unanimous consent to suspend the vote and to hold it for later on so that they can debate all the suspensions bills, which it's a procedure ordinarily reserved for non-controversial matters that they think have overwhelming support and don't require extensive debate, thus the 40-minute rule for all of them. But they can hold and stack all of those votes. So they can have all the debate between just the bare essentials in terms of members who have to be on hand, the sponsors of the bills or the committee chairs and ranking members who understand the bill and recognize it and agree to come to Washington on a Monday to hold those debates. And then they basically postpone the votes until everybody else gets there. And then they just say, all right, while you were gone, while you were on the plane, we debated 20 of these bills, and we're going to call you to the floor on Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday, and we're going to catch up with all these votes and just do them one after the other and have 20 votes in a row all on these suspension bills. You were absent. Ask your staff what they were, but they're generally non-controversial things, and you don't have to worry about it too much. And just talk to your staffers about which, if any, you might object to, and then come back here for a marathon of 20 votes in a row, and we'll clear this calendar out. So that's the way they usually handle these things. Can you do suspensions on a day other than Monday and Tuesday? If you're super curious about that and you just think, this is so stupid, how could you, suspension of the rules, you should be able to do that anytime. Well, Of course, if you really need to suspend all the rules and you want to do that on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday or Sunday, or, if you feel like it, Monday or Tuesday for that matter, even when the procedure is available to you, and you think everybody loves the idea, then ask for unanimous consent. That's just as good, but if it turns out somebody objects, then you're going to need a vote. Well, then the next best thing would be suspension of the rules on Monday or Tuesday. If you've absolutely got to have a suspension of the rules vote on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever, it can be done. It can be done. You can waive the rule against limiting suspensions considerations to Monday and Tuesday. How do you do that, though? You got to go to the Rules Committee and get a special rule to do it. But the whole point of using the suspension of the rules procedure is that you can avoid having to go through the trouble of debating in front of the Rules Committee, getting a rule, fighting it out, exactly how will the rule be shaped, and then voting to approve the rule on the House floor, but holding an hour's debate first on whether or not to vote for or against the rule, and then you vote for or against the rule, and then the rule passes, and the rule says tomorrow or later or 10 minutes from now, we're going to debate the actual underlying bill. Already, you've blown the point. There's no point in passing a special rule to allow a suspension of the rules to be considered on a different date, unless there's extraordinary circumstances like there are now and you're time pressured. The rule also contemplates, the rule about doing it on Monday and Tuesday, the possibility of end of the session pressure, which is what's happening now, except it's pretty strict. You can consider suspensions of the rules on Monday and Tuesday normally, or you can consider them on other days of the week if you are within 6 days of the end of the legislative session, which is ordinarily not something you can determine unless there has been a adjournment resolution agreed to in advance, because you never know when the session is going to end unless you've set that out and agreed to it by resolution. Or I guess in this case, we know that the old Congress dissolves to make way for the new Congress on January 3rd, and they can dissolve it the same day, and that's probably what they will do. But we're not yet 6 days from January 3rd. That's the problem. When will we be 6 days from January 3rd? For sure. You can work on Saturdays and Sundays. So ordinarily we wouldn't count those as legislative days, but for this purpose, they're calendar days. They're there. We have to count them. When would we be eligible to bring up a suspension of the rules bill outside of Monday and Tuesday due to being, inevitably within the 6 day window? Well, Tuesday of next week, at which point you would be eligible to bring it up under suspension anyway. And in fact, you could do it faster on Monday. So again, here really, as it works out, yes, there's this exception, but it doesn't do you any good because you end up in the same place. Anyway, let's see. So there you have it. I don't know. It's just one of those crazy things. But I figured I would spend some time explaining it to you because that's what we do here. We're crazy. And we spend time on this. You'll be able to explain this to somebody and bore them to death. You would have been able to do this at a Christmas party, except you can't have any of those because COVID. I almost forgot. So if you're on a Zoom party, they can all hang up on you instead when you explain this to them. All right. Just wanted to give you the opportunity to be the Rand Paul or Ted Cruz of your next Zoom holiday party. I know you were looking for that. All right. Want to talk about something else? Why not? Let's do that. What other things do we have parked? Oh, there's so much. And so much of it very interesting, but we got to sort through the news of the day. Here's something of some interest, totally out of this subject area, but piqued my interest. Well, at least read the headline and the lead on this one in the Washington Post. FBI links Iran to an online hit list targeting top officials who've refuted Trump's election fraud claims. This is very interesting and possibly a very clever, if evil, play by anybody, whoever it might be. But that Iran might try this was particularly evil, clever. You probably wouldn't be surprised in your online travels to run across a list targeting top officials who've undermined Trump's election fraud claims. and think this is from angry Trumpers and MAGA types who are crazy and advocate violence as a solution and should be banned from Twitter and public life, etc., all of which is really true if they were the ones posting that thing. But just, I don't know whether this is true or not, but consider this possibility, how brilliant evil it would be for some malevolent force, in this case it's suspected to be Iran, to post, disguised as an American, and trolling America by saying, I'm a MAGA Trump supporter, and here's my list of top officials who've refuted Trump's election fraud claims, and we ought to target them for something, whatever it might be. And everybody says, this is outrageous. You people are crazy. See, this is another example of Trumpers and MAGA types being so far outside the norms, they need to be shamed and excluded from public life. At which point you then say, you know what, they're all like this, and we should shame them all and exclude them all from public life. And then you find out, oh, it wasn't really even an American person at all who did this. They've all, they might believe this stuff, but for whatever reason, let's say they've theoretically all stayed quiet. It was instead the Iranians pretending to be those guys and framing them up for the rest of us to chew them up and spit it out. What a fantastically evil and, well thought out plan that might be. Any basis to it? I don't know. Ellen Nakashima, Amy Gardner, and Aaron Davis think so. The FBI, they write, has concluded that Iran was behind online efforts earlier this month to incite lethal violence against the Bureau's director, a former top U.S. cyber expert, that's Krebs, and multiple state elections officials who have refuted claims of widespread voter fraud promoted by President Trump and his allies, federal and state officials said Tuesday. By the way, in addition not only to the cleverness and evilness of framing up people for this, you also have this ironic weirdness. Suppose you didn't believe that this was true, or you wanted to dismiss it, or whatever, and you are a Trump supporter, or you might end up saying, well, I don't care that the Iranians wrote it. It's true and right and good. And here you are now, in order to save the validity of a list that really should never have been made and has no valid basis in being disseminated and calling for violence against these people. But in order to circumvent that norm and divide the country even further and cause possibly violent division in the country, you will align yourself with the Iranian security services and intelligence services in order to get that done. That's a pretty good trick if you can pull that off as the Iranians. FBI Director Chris Wray and ousted Homeland Security Department official Christopher Krebs were among more than a dozen people whose images, home addresses, and other personal information were posted on a website entitled Enemies of the People. They even got the parlance right. That's what the president calls them. So excellent job by the very sneaky Iranian intelligence services, if that's who did it. Crosshairs, in fact, were superimposed over the photos, which have a history here in this country. Many of these officials, in one way or another, have attested to the security of November's election, saying that they had not seen any evidence of widespread fraud, although here is evidence of fraud perpetrated by the Iranians, just not voter fraud. This is a conclusion, of course, that's at odds with Trump's baseless claims that the election was rigged. And that's one of the problems with making baseless claims, is it's also easy to baselessly supplement those claims in very, very crazy ways. And no one will expect to see any basis for those crazy claims because there were no basis for the original claims either, and it's all of a piece. That's what makes it so clever and interesting. Does anybody believe this is not true? Let's see. Iran was active in seeking to interfere in the U.S. elections, they say, targeting Democratic voters in October with fake but menacing emails that purported to be from far-right groups threatening recipients to vote for Trump, quote, or we will come after you. I think we might even have mentioned that. Iran condemned the revelations made by top U.S. intelligence officials like DNI John Ratcliffe, but Iran says, no, we didn't do it. That's baseless and absurd, just like all the things that you're claiming in that country. Also a great way of capitalizing on our own confusion caused by other malevolent actors along the way. It's really quite diabolical, which calls for maybe the horror dramatic music. Anyway, just very interesting. The article goes on at some length here, but I want to skip around to a couple more subjects, but at least to bring that one to your attention. I mean, I'd give it an A as a class project in Iranian Security Services College, but, I declined the teaching position there because that would be treason. So, anyway, other things worth considering. Did you know that Mark Meadows, chief of staff at the White House, traveled down to Georgia looking for a soul to steal, I guess, but he was in a bind and he was way behind. And he was looking to make a great deal. And the deal he tried to make, I don't know whether he offered anybody a deal, but apparently he was there to observe Georgia's absurd additional sops to the Trump crowd, the ballot signature audit that they're putting themselves through, even though they know very well up front and have been upfront about this, that it will not and cannot change the outcome of the election in Georgia. But Mark Meadows went there anyway, just in case there were any arms he could twist, I guess. But he just said, I'm just here observing the process. Just the White House chief of staff leaving the White House unannounced, heading to Georgia to look in on this, even though there's a coronavirus pandemic and blah, blah, blah. And the vaccine that we've developed and are taking credit for as Operation Warp Speed is still languishing in a warehouse somewhere. And there's a plot going on in the Oval Office to overthrow the government that, as chief of staff, I should probably be responsible for breaking up, but I'm not because I'm here instead. No problem. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports, Mark Nees in putting this together. Meadows made a surprise visit yesterday, to observe Georgia's audit of absentee ballot envelope signatures and ask questions about the process, like, can you change the results? Meadows, accompanied by Secret Service agents, for some reason, showed up at the Cobb County Civic Center where investigators from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and Secretary of State's office were reviewing absentee ballot envelopes to check whether voter signatures match those on file. I think what they're after here is to be able to say, you complained about the signatures not matching and we checked just to shut you up and they match, so shut up, at which point Trump will just say, no, I'm not going to shut up, and you will have wasted your time. He met with Deputy Secretary of State Jordan Fuchs in a hallway to inquire about the signature audit and what it would find. He wasn't permitted inside the room where investigators were examining ballot envelopes, so good. Nobody above the law here. They didn't let him in, but what a waste of time to go to Georgia and then not be allowed in. I think he thought they would let him in. I'm not making any allegations as much as I am trying to get to the truth, Meadows was overheard saying. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said that the signature audit will restore confidence in Georgia's elections. No, it won't. And further dispel unsubstantiated fraud claims. It's also not true because the people who need to hear that will not believe no matter what you say. Not believe you no matter what you say. But I don't know. If the rest of us want to be able to point to it and say, they even did another audit and you lost. But that won't move anybody. The audit, scheduled to be completed by next week, won't change the outcome of Georgia's election, which Biden won by about 12,000 votes. Chief of Staff Mark Meadows made a visit here in Cobb County. He wanted to know the process of the signature match audit we're currently conducting, Fuchs said after the meeting. He just asked basic process questions, wanted to know what exactly we were verifying. Well, it's a effing signature audit. We're verifying signatures, dumbass. Go back to Washington. Meadows, who reports to Trump, didn't speak about the reason for his visit. His office didn't immediately return a phone message seeking comment, and it's all a big nothing and a big waste of time, and a bunch of Secret Service agents had their day wasted too. Just thought I would tell you about that. I think he obviously was looking to twist some arms and get something else out of it, and they held firm and sent him home with nothing. So just thought I would let you know about that. On the pardon front, we haven't gotten down to brass tacks about who was pardoned, but I think you've heard it by now. In fact, excellent article on the subject. Well, lots of excellent articles out there, but the most excellent Everest is the one over at Daily Kos, written by Hunter. It was nice of them to assign this absurdity to Hunter. He ran his story under the title of The Mob Presidency. Trump pardons Republican thieves, co-conspirators, and war criminals. So I think one of the ones we haven't mentioned yet, the Blackwater war criminals. Of course, Blackwater run by Eric Prince, and of course Eric Prince, big muckety-muck in Trump's mind, and brother of Betsy DeVos, our education secretary, and lots of other terrible connections, including the weird secretive meeting in the Seychelles prior to Trump taking office. You know about all that. Blackwater criminals that we're talking about, the several of their mercenaries who pretty much unprovoked, and because they thought they could get away with it because Iraq was a lawless zone and they had guns, machine-gunned civilians out in the public square as they were going about their daily business just because they're crazy a-holes with big guns and thought that they could do anything they wanted in the fog of war, but they were caught, prosecuted, sentenced, and Trump says, let them go because they're heroes and war fighters, or something to that effect. And it's disgusting and will damage us immeasurably in international circles forever, but okay. Hunter will take you through who they are and what they did. But in addition to that, I thought I would add the comment here from, or a tweet here from Daniel Dresner, who points to the work of Harvard Law School professor Jack Goldsmith, who writes very frequently in some of the top legal blogs that we read. I'm trying to think of, there are many. But at any rate, this is the story here. A tabulation, this is part of a pullout from the New York Times reporting on the pardons. A tabulation by Harvard Law School professor Jack Goldsmith found that of the 45 pardons or commutations Trump has granted up until Tuesday, or had granted up until Tuesday, so not even including this group, 88% aided someone with a personal tie to the president or furthered his political aims, which is a grand perversion of the pardon and clemency power. No surprise, of course, because it's a grand pervert doing the grand perverting, and whatever. But it's worth noting because it's just particularly grievous and disgusting, and thought we should enter that onto the record. Let's see. So, others of worth pointing out. Yes, right. I mentioned the various appointments to other boards. This came to my attention via the tweet of Rebecca Ballhaus, Wall Street Journal White House reporter, who noted yesterday on Twitter, Trump today said he will nominate Paolo Zampoli, Melania Trump's former modeling agent, putting it kindly, to the Kennedy Center Board of Trustees. He also named Pam Bondi, who defended him during impeachment, and of course who took the $25,000 bribe to drop the Trump University lawsuit in Florida when she was Florida Attorney General. Pam Bondi also named to that board, one of a series of appointments he's been doling out to friends and aides. Somewhere there was a list of that number, but I've lost track of it along the way. But those were some of the best known names on the list. Again, I encourage you to take a look at Paolo Zampoli's weird history. There you can find a lot of it in the, I think he's discussed in the now widely read piece by then Daily Kos community member Swedish Jewfish with the, remember that wild piece that I read so many years ago, and I think I've gone through it more than once on the air. We all knew about the trafficking, right? Written about the abuses that Trump modeling perpetrated against the teenage Eastern European girls that he imported for his nefarious purposes way back when. But Zampoli is named, John Casablancas is named. Of course, they recount how Trump not only copied their model of modeling agency, modeling agencies in general, but that one of the weirder things that Donald Trump did, knowing what kind of people Casablancas and Zampoli were, but desirous, I guess, maybe, of granting Ivanka what was then her teenage wish of a modeling career, actually did send off Trump or Ivanka at like age 13 to kind of be, tarted up and trotted out there by Casablancas and Zampoli as a model. And I guess he probably did it. He probably figured, well, these guys won't dare lay a hand on her because I'm Donald Trump, and they know that they're in for trouble if they cross Donald J. Trump. And I don't know. Or maybe he thought, I'll trade her off to them in exchange for them sending their models my way. Because that was part of the scheme there was that, one of the things you do is you could dally in molesting all of your own models, but it's not a very good model for perpetuating your agency because word will get around and people won't sign up. You won't be able to recruit these models from Eastern Europe. So you want to run your operation by the drug dealer's code of not getting high on your own supply. But if the whole point of getting into this is to molest teenage models from Eastern Europe, then what's the point if you can't molest your own? Well, this is the reason why we all have our own modeling agencies. We will molest each other's models, and then that won't be pinned on us as the boss, and we'll agree to keep quiet about it in exchange for each other's discretion. So, it was a pretty clever ploy in that sense. And again, in terms of being evil but clever, and it disturbs me greatly that his serial sex crimes will be covered up in a flurry of political and financial crimes instead, which are arguably important to a larger number of people, maybe only because they're better known. And, of course, the national media is much more comfortable talking about those crimes, even though it's been covering up and normalizing them for years. They're still, by comparison, far more comfortable talking about that than about his serial sex criminality. So I guess that's left to us to do. Well, it's a hard job, but, We'll take it on, at least part of the time. Anyway, let's see. Other things that I wanted to share with you as we run down in time. Any other quick hits that we ought to bring up? Yeah, sure. Let's see. This is one that ought to be on your radar anyway. We don't have time to get into the specifics of it, but I saw this in the New York Times the other day. The headline here is the Red Slime lawsuit that could sink right-wing media. Won't have time to get into why it's called red slime, I don't think. But voting machine companies threaten highly dangerous cases against Fox, Newsmax, and OAN, says Floyd Abrams. This is a piece by Ben Smith in the New York Times. And essentially, basically, the lawyers for the voting machine companies, both Dominion and Smartmatic, and the ones that are basically being accused all the time of Rudy Giuliani and conflated as apparently having some sort of overlapping ownership, and apparently they don't. But, this whole stupid conspiracy theory that they're putting together that somehow Hugo Chavez had something to do with programming these things, and all the cheating that's being done, they say, by these machines and the people who own the companies are pissed, and they're going to sue, and it looks like they can win, and they'll sue and win under the same theory, interestingly enough, that was used to sue and destroy Gawker and associated websites and media outlets before, and the theory is strong enough, we saw, to actually prevail. And now, all of a sudden, Newsmax and others are saying, oh, by the way, we need to issue a clarification of what we've been reporting. Those people were expressing their opinions about Dominion and Smartmatic and other voting machine companies, and not actual verified facts about them. And we stand for facts because we're a news organization. They're doing their best to backpedal and they figure correct the records such that they could moot the lawsuits that will otherwise destroy and bankrupt them. And it's kind of an exciting prospect that these things, these stupid right-wing outlets could end up being bankrupted and destroyed by this because they're just not powerful enough and rich enough to be able to fight this suit out and endure the loss. By the way, read the article. You'll figure out why they're talking about it in terms of red slime. It's not just that they're red, state-leaning, and slimy people. There's more to it. Actually has to do with another lawsuit in which beef producers were able to recover in a libel lawsuit against a major news organization. I think it was ABC that was reporting on, I guess what they thought was the conditions under which this beef was being processed, and noting that the beef, which was extremely finely ground so that it looked like a paste, which they called pink slime, that was extraordinarily damaging to the company. And it could be, because why not? It's food. You don't really want to be describing your foodstuffs as pink slime. They sued these beef manufacturers, and they won. So that, too, between the Gawker suits opening up media to this liability and the pink slime theory of defamation being available to manufacturers and business interests in general, apparently this is a serious enough threat that Newsmax and OAN have woken up to it and are trying to backpedal out of it. Keep an eye on that. We'll see whether these suits go forward and keep these operations in check. It's about time. It's way too late, of course. But if you really want to be rid of Donald Trump and his influence forever, you're going to have to make sure that these media outlets that amplify his message are gone too. We'll be back tomorrow. Greg will join us. And for now, stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy.
From
next.
networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, good. He'll be on hand to spend even more time, I'm sure, on the hot subjects of the day, domestically and internationally. Let's take a look here. Here's something. The judge ruled the Arizona Republican Party may face legal sanctions for filing a Trump election lawsuit that was already contradicted by the state audit. Good. Finally stopping this stuff.